Carla's moving to the United States and then transferring to the new public school in her city separates her from her sisters and any other acquaintances that she may have had. Alone in this new environment, she finds herself as a target. At her new school, the kids, especially a terrible group of boys, sees her as different, as an outsider to the United States. When the teachers aren't looking, these boys pick on her by verbally and sexually assaulting her. They call her slurs and other names that dehumanize and objectify her. They pull up her skirt and touch private areas of her body that they have no right to touch. Being the outsider in her school, as well as the United States as a whole, Carla has no way of speaking out against the horrifying things that happen against her. She's trespassed and violated, but also confined from being able to do anything about it. Carla is not able to survive in the sense that a part of her will die no matter what she does, her innocent side, her Dominican side, or her American side. It's sad seeing that in many of these cases, she doesn't really have a choice of what happens to her. This leads to a clear negative socialization for her in the United States and a terrible loss of innocence. The pain that Carla experiences is so intense that, as a reader, it doesn't seem like it is a price worth paying for becoming free of the illusion and going into the adult world. Showing these encounters from the perspective of Carla humanizes her by showing the pain and suffering that the United States has put her through. By doing so, Alvarez creates a counter-narrative against the idea that immigrants to the United States are a problem.
When the Garcia family celebrates their one-year anniversary in America, instead of wishing to make friends here, or better assimilate, Carla wishes to go back home. Placed in a hostile, foreign environment, Carla's only survival strategy seems to be wishing things would revert back to the way they used to be. Even seemingly trivial experiences lead to losses of innocence that don't result in positive socialization like they do for John in the Cheneysville incident, but rather negative socialization. When Carla sees the trespassing sign in the beginning of the trespassing chapter, she mistakes the sign's definition of trespassing for the religious definition of trespassing, a violation of ethics. This misunderstanding not only highlights how new Carla is to the English language, but also how new she is to American culture, given that no assimilated American would mistake the sign's definition. When Laura explains the sign's true definition, Carla nods her head disappointedly. Not only because this experience reinforces how much English she still has to learn, but also because the sign and the wired fence are symbols of the hostility she experiences in America. The trespassing sign and fence are meant to prevent outsiders from entering. Similarly, Carla feels that she is prevented from entering not only this property, but also American society more broadly. Rather than positively drive her towards assimilation, this experience, as well as similar losses of innocence, only prompt her to see America as hostile. Instead of trying to make friends and adapt, she continually prays for what she acknowledges is a near impossibility, returning to the Dominican Republic. All the while, she grows more isolated and undergoes negative rather than positive socialization.
When Carla's walking home from the bus stop and is approached by the man in the car, she experiences yet another instance of trespassing. Earlier, we've seen how she thought she was trespassing after seeing the sign that said no trespassing and confused it with the only context of trespassing she knew, which came from the Our Father prayer, and saying those who trespass against you. But in this instance, this man who is a pedophile and exposed himself to her, and was like masturbating in front of her, was an act of some trespassing against her, and it was kind of trespassing against her innocence and against her right to be able to choose what she looks at, and what she experiences and what she does. And I think that's one of the things that's made it really difficult for Carla and her family up until this point, is not only are they feeling like they are trespassing on different American, land, different American culture, but also people are trespassing against them, and causing trauma to people like Carla, who, had to go through a really, really rough situation, especially because police then got involved. So the trespassing in this chapter, not only is the Garcia family feeling as if they're trespassing on other people, but also it's people trespassing against them and making their assimilation into America really, really challenging, and just creates, a bigger desire to go home.
Building off of what James said earlier, I would also agree that Carla's experience in the United States ultimately resulted in an example of negative socialization, And in this chapter, this is specifically evident through the trauma that is brought onto her by her family, and specifically on page 155 by her father. She explains how she wants to have a more traditional American childhood like her classmates have, by her family driving her to school, but then it goes on to say, her immigrant father, with his thick mustache and accent and three-piece suit, would only bring her more ridicule. Even though Carla could imagine owning an expensive car, she could not imagine her parents as different from what they were. This quote illustrates two of the traumas that Carla balances and deals with in this chapter. The first being that she believes she is ultimately trespassing into the United States because she does not fit in with the rest of her classmates and has a distinctly different childhood. Adding on to this already complex trauma, she also feels like her family as a whole is trespassing into the United States, and through this she feels a lot of embarrassment and feels even more isolated in this country. While it is hard to judge the long-term impact of this trauma through this chapter alone, earlier in the book or later in Carla's life, we find out that she became a psychiatrist, and there is a section of the book where she is analyzing her childhood with her husband. And the way she does this makes it seem like she's analyzing a separate patient. This is at the dinner table when all the daughters go back home for their father's birthday. And the fact that she treats her childhood like she would treat a story she's hearing from her patient would suggest that she ultimately had a negative experience.